Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to the Real Life Practice Podcast. My name is Lindsay Sturkey, and I'm here with my co host, Teresa McCloy, and also some special guests that we'll introduce here in just a moment. But we are at the end of a series we've been doing called Seasons of Formation, and we're looking at not only our stages of life, but our seasons of spiritual formation and how that looks at different points in our life with God, the challenges, the benefits, what is unique about each and every stage of our faith. So we are excited. This series, we've been interviewing different people that bring different perspectives. And so we are rounding out this series with two very special guests. Teresa, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of set up our conversation today.
Well, first of all, let me welcome Dick and Sybil Towner into the conversation. Welcome to the both of you.
And we're
Very well.
glad to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you, and we won't spend the whole time talking about our stories together and how we've met, but Dick and Sibyl have been mentors of mine for probably over 10 years now. I know I've had a rich blessing of having them in my life, and Lindsay as well. And we have just some crazy connections of how God has weaved all of our stories together through different places. But today we are here with Dick and Sybil to talk about this stage of life in their 80s. But before we get to that, Dick or Sybil, either one of you, just want to introduce yourselves as to where you're located. Some people may not know you. I can't imagine that they wouldn't, but they may not know where you're located or the work that you're doing in this season or where you're living. So would one or the other of you be willing to introduce the two of you?
Real quick nutshell. 16 years ago, through an unanticipated, unforeseen series of little nudges from God, we wound up revitalizing, if you will, a failing Christian retreat center in the boondocks of southern Indiana, outside of Oldenburg, for those who may know that little town. And that's been where we've been since, and it's just a super crowning blessing of an already blessed life.
And just to take that a little bit further, Sybil, why don't you share the work that you're continuing to do? I know Dick is very involved there at the retreat center and in that work, but what is the work that you're continuing to do even in this season?
Well, of course, a retreat center needs to have retreatants to flourish. And I think that's where I come in, and is in welcoming, in being a part of the welcome, and that provides experiences and listening to people who are trying to sort out their life and needing to slow down, restore, be in the midst of creation, and be able to then go back out into their life and work of ministry with a renewed energy, a better focus, and a sense that God is with them and for them, so that they know they're beloved. So that's really the work I've been involved in. And the specific way that has unfolded is actually training spiritual directors through sustainable faith and taking people on the Ignatian journey, and then doing other retreats for people as they want.
And that's where, I walked with Sybil and Dick the most, and Lindsay now has been through that training. It's become their location where they are, has become that place to come away for a while. I know for me and for hundreds, probably thousands of other people. So, and it'll lead us full circle as we get into your story and just how, this work in the second half of life has become your work. But Lindsay, I'm going to turn it over to you to just open up, with some questions, and we'll begin this conversation.
Yes. Well, we want to hear about your current season of life, but first, would you each tell us just a little bit about your faith journey before we talk about what God's doing now? What is some of the story of your life with God up to this point?
For me, it began very early in my life, coming from Germany after World War II, and to my grandmother, who was American and who took us to the church. And the people there loved us, and I never got over it. And as I've grown up and seen some of the things that a church can do, that is certainly not issuing forth Christ's love, has not swayed me away from a love for the church, has prompted me to grow and to be a part of a peaceful and living presence in whatever community I live in, serving and loving people of all ages.
Mhm. And for me, I was raised by grandparents who did not attend church. I was very fortunately fell in with a group of peers who came from whole families, and they went to church every Sunday. And the really sharp girls were part of the youth group and all. And I thought, well, by golly, and I've had the opportunity to thank those peers for the influence they had on me, because I was very susceptible. And at that point in time, it wasn't certainly a deep foundational faith, but it found, on the other hand, the foundation stones for the faith were planted at that point in my life. In our courtship, Sibyl introduced me to a deeper insight into what Christ means to a person when they make a faith commitment to him. And the little saying we had about our time together before we were married was, you and I, God all around us and hope within us. That was kind of the theme by which we entered our marriage. I was an engineer by undergraduate training, but our pastor came to us. I was involved with the church. I was an elder and so forth, and I'd grown significantly in my faith, but still had a long way to go. But the senior pastor saw some gifts I had in the way of administration and all, and asked if I would consider becoming the executive pastor. And I told him that wasn't in the cards, really. That wasn't my gift and so forth. God let me know otherwise, that I should take the position. And that became the real growing time for me as a member of that incredible ministry team and that senior pastor. So
Just to give context to what you're sharing there, Dick, because I think it's interesting for no matter what season you're in to hear what was roughly the age that you were in at that season, because I think it gives hope to people to say, okay, I feel like I've done what I was supposed to do at, 40, or I missed what I was supposed to do because I went to college for one thing. And then, so as you're sharing that story of, I moved from this to this, where were you at in life? Where were you in Sibyl at that time?
I was 40 years old when I began my time at the church as vocational ministry, if you will.
Yeah.
And we had sons that were just in middle school and emerging high school. And I was doing volunteer work and actually followed Dick in being on the staff of that church as the minister to families with children, and also directing our summer camps and conferences. And I'd been involved in camp work before that time.
Yeah. I'd already made one vocational shift, and I'd gone from engineering to higher education, student personnel administration, and was on the staff at the University of Cincinnati as Dean of Men. And interestingly, when we announced to the family that God had spoken in a way that was pretty undeniable, and that I was going to take this position with the church, our sons said, well, Dad, what are we going to tell our friends? Because they went to an academic high school where there were a lot of Indian chiefs and person. And they were fine saying, oh, my dad's a dean at the university. But they said, what are we going to tell them? I said, well, I guess you tell them I'm working for the church. And they said, whoa, we can't say that.
I think that's such a great sharing, though, because it's all these, different stages that we go through and our families go through with us.
Yes.
As simple as you were talking about, even going into the children's ministry and teaching. My mom will say, she's also in her 80s, that she learned her faith through raising us and, hearing all the stories and becoming involved with vacation Bible schools and camps and all of those things. That Sibyl, I hear some of that thread that you're sharing there too, of that's where your family was, and then it became your gift.
Yeah. And we took in my brothers and sisters when our boys were only 3 and 8 months. So we had extended family early on. And so our sons learned a lot in that experience and learned a lot and gave a lot. And we even had my grandmother live with us in her 80s up to 95. And so it just, there were 3-4 generations in that house. That was really was a place of learning and living.
Well, I know we have certain
But
questions.
that was back in the early years, and we want to talk about the late years. Yeah.
Well, and that's where I want to get to, because I do want to tie a thread before we get to what your current stage is, because there was another pretty significant shift. And I think as people listen into your story and they're starting to put their story together, that those shifts are okay, that God is walking before us. So let's talk a little bit about then getting to Chicago. How did you get to Chicago from Cincinnati? What was going on there?
Well, it was another unique kind of experience because there were several places I'd always said I never wanted to live, in Los Angeles and New York City and Chicago. I mean, man, I'm kind of a smaller town, love the outdoors and what have you.
Yeah.
And I'd done a little bit of church consulting in my role at our church in Cincinnati was an equipping church and trying to help lots of other churches do a better accomplishment of their calling from God. And so I'd done some consultation, and I happened to do a consultation for a large church in Chicago, Willow Creek specifically. And that led to their coming back to me and saying, well, we have a position here that we'd like you to consider taking. And I said, well, I'm flattered and thank you, but we're happy in Cincinnati. We want to be in. And for the second major time in our life, God interjected and let it be known pretty clearly that, no, you're supposed to take that position in Chicago. So we went there.
And I think of a little side story that makes that significant is 3 years before that, Dick had felt a weariness. He had been holding 2 jobs at the church at College Hill, and he just was feeling this weariness. And anyway, through a clearness committee process, discerned that he really needed to leave. And that was really shocking to him, even though it felt right. And in that leaving, it was thinking, well, I'll do a little consulting, and there are some things I'd like to do at home and that, but thinking something would unfold. Well, year 1 went by, year 2 went by, and year 3.
Yeah, but year 3 was really a great, successful year. I made into the 5 figures in church consulting. I mean, it was over $10,000. I mean, it was.
And might have been a big deal. Again, context. Well, the context of age at this point. Where are we?
52 to 55 was when I was doing the consulting.
And really, I mean, into that second half, if you think of second half beginning at 40 instead of 50, with life expectancy being 81 in America. And so during that time, though, Dick went, this is what's key, he really entered the inner journey. I don't think he would have called it that at that moment. That wasn't the language. But he reread books that had been influential to him in servant leadership, Strategy for Living by Ted Engstrom, and a number of pieces, and was revitalized. And so that when we went to Willow.
And I might just throw in, I took deeper in looks at me than I had ever done before.
Yeah. So on his desk was a sign that says, being is more important than doing. And
for me,
about that symbol.
As a 1 on the Enneagram and just other personal characteristics, that was a pretty big deal sign.
So when we went to Willow, we were 10 years older than the pastor, than Bill, and most of the church. We were, and so they were weary. They were at that stage of saying, what is it all about? And then Dick and I became a part of a smaller group from the outside that began to listen. And we listened to people and then got involved in teaching and other things that began to open that up. It wasn't high profile. It was low profile and developing relationships person by person.
Yeah, it's sitting here talking to you both. I just think of when I first crossed paths with you at Willow, and this was 2005 is when I went there in my early 20s, there to learn ministry. And I just remember sitting under your teaching, Sibyl, and listening to you. And it was one of those things that people had such a respect for who you were. It was just, everybody knew who you were, not because you made yourself a big deal or you had this high position or anything like that, but the way that you listened and the way that you shared your heart for what it looks like to enter into those deeper places with God. I remember you from those days, and it's just so cool now, full circle, to be sitting here having this conversation with you and to work together with the MAPS and in spiritual direction training. So yeah, I'm just kind of reflecting on how significant your presence was, both of you at Willow, in the roles that you were in.
Yeah. And something that you say there, Lindsay, one of the things that went for me when I went, and it was I didn't have a position, and I interviewed with people at Willow, and every person I interviewed with, it was just flat. And God had said to me, if there's something that you're asked to do and you can do it, say yes. And the other thing he said to me,
but don't go fetching for it yourself.
No, don't go fetching for it. And take someone with you. Mentor. Build into other people. Do not go out doing something by yourself. And that's the first thing I did. And Lindsay, you and Teresa both know was Gail Donahue. And she would just come there, and they had asked me to teach. And I went to Gail and I said, Gail, would you like to do this? Would you like to do this with me? And she's thinking she's just going to do a little support in that. And I said, oh no, you're going to do the setup. You're going to do the setup, and then I'll do the content. And again, it really, doing this for years, developed her. And it's the same thing that happened with Joan. So anyway, they're not the only ones, but you know them. And that was.
And I think you're both naming something in that season, mid-50s, that many people are starting to think of, especially now. It feels like in our culture that many people by mid-50s are starting to think, how do I get out of what I feel that I'm doing? And yet you were modeling how to go deeper in.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit, particularly, you're also naming what was happening inside of you in that time and what God was calling you to be mentors, to be listeners. What were the challenges with that, though, right there in that season before we move to kind of the next stage? What were the challenges in that?
Well, I can give you one of the challenges as a woman. I within the youth ministry, it was the girls were cheerleaders and the guys were on the field.
Okay.
And I knew I had to speak up. And I don't like rejection. And I knew that was going to be, I really had to show forth. So God gave me an idea of how to speak with a metaphor to the youth pastor, and it's exploring a new idea, and he listened and really opened something. But that was a challenge of knowing that the church espoused women in leadership, but it did not actually live it out in a proactive way.
It's interesting, Sibyl. I literally just wrote about this on Sunday, and Lindsay and I have had many conversations just in the past few weeks about it, and still processing that within my story, even using the maps and the tools of the maps of even 10 years later, leaving the ministry space as a woman, and what, it was women like you that were going before in that space and helping to navigate for your own self and your own story, but also, for the sake of others. So, Dick, how about you?
And I think from a male standpoint, the challenge is, and it just fits with this time of life. I believe it's God's call for us, but is to step aside from the key leadership and being the CEO and what have you, and building into the younger next generation, and who are going to be leading while you're sitting in a sideline, encouraging and mentoring and tutoring and what have you. And for lots of men, that's a really hard shift. It's, I believe, and Parker Palmer does some wonderful writing on this, as do a number of other authors whose names escape me at the moment, but and it's consistent with what's going on in terms of our brain and the whole concepts of fluid and crystallized intelligence and what's happening in the frontal lobe in this stage of life, but we often, as males particularly, I think, try to deny those changes and say, no, I'm still
capable, still reading in those. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is not arriving, that the quote, the beauty is in the walking. We're betrayed by destinations. And so within the culture, we've created destinations for people at age 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And so I decided that that was not going to be my mode. And I knew I needed to decide it because the culture was going to come at me a lot of different ways to change and shape it. And so that's where I picked up the 25, 50, 75, 100, and which I've shifted.
Talking about the four quarters
of life. But no retirement, but that if the game is played well, it's played all 4 quarters. And so now Matthew Kelly in his book, The Fourth Quarter, talks about 20, 40, 60, 80. And if you're over 80, it's bonus time. And so for me, it was taking on another way of living that I felt was really scriptural, biblical, that retirement is not a part of the plan, that what I do changes, but I don't drop out, and I don't become childish.
There are two things I want to pick up on there. Sib's made the reference to retirement in that. And up front, there's nothing wrong with at some point in time, later life, to stop doing what you've been doing, and particularly if that's no longer very fruitful or satisfying, but to think of just dropping out, if you will, and not doing anything other than golf 3 times a week and latest TV series. That's just, retirement is a social experiment created in the United States in 1937, following the Great Depression. It was an effort to encourage older workers to stop working because, frankly, at that point in time, there was no such thing as retirement. You worked till you couldn't do it anymore, till you died. And so they set this age 65 at a time when the life expectancy was 61. And now we've got somehow picked that up, and we're talking early retirement while the life expectancy's gone up to 81. And it just makes it's a horrible
It's a poor
experiment.
use.
It's a poor use, and it's certainly not from a Christian perspective. God didn't keep you here for another 20, 25 years just to sit on your rear end and
Or to be selfish.
or
Yeah.
to be.
Yes. And I'd love for both of you to give insight, because I know this series of books, both of you are avid readers of many, many things. Sibyl, you were talking on another call we were on about like going through books and deciding what to keep and different things. I know you've been in that process, but Ronald Rolheiser has a series of books. It starts with Holy Longing, moves to Sacred Fire, and now Insane for the Light. But Dick, I know that there was a season for you where the Sacred Fire book and some of that work was important. And I think it would be great for our listeners to hear a couple of things. Number one, how books sometimes become a place to mentor you, guide you, and draw you in from people that have gone before, maybe, deep spiritual leaders or whatever. So just from that perspective, for people to hear about books such as these, you mentioned reading books earlier, but can you share a little bit of, in a season of life, this is still mid-season, what that Sacred Fire book was for you and maybe what the story was there that you had?
Well, I think there's one particular story in that book that, on the one hand, if when I tell you about it, and anyone listening will say, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, how in the world? But on the other hand, it engaged me, and I think can for many others as well. And so it's a story about a couple, a fictitious couple, and they've gotten this view for their life going forward. And so I'll pick it up after let's see. We're retired, we're comfortable, we're still enjoying good health, we're really enjoying our grandchildren. In fact, John's just built a huge deck off our living room so that we have more space for our family when they drop around. There's so many options still open to us and so many things we would still like to do with our lives. But we've been praying together and praying a lot over the story of Abraham and Sarah and how when they were old, done with their childbearing years, God called them to set out to an unknown place and all. And they go on a little bit about Sarah and Abraham's experience. And then they say, we feel God calling us into a big, big unknown as he did them. We've mulled over this for a long time, and this is our plan. What we want to do is sell our house, and after buying 2 one-way airline tickets, give the rest of the money to the food bank, because Jesus said to sell everything and give money to the poor. The one-way tickets we would buy would be for Pakistan. We feel God is calling us to spend the rest of our lives as missionaries to Islam in Pakistan. We picked Pakistan because there's so much tension today between Christians and Muslims, and there's a need for more understanding between us. Our plan is to go there with no money and to live simply with the poor there and to die there. We presented this plan to our children, and they were beyond belief, stunned, and demanded that, among other things, we talk to you. And they've just explained this to their pastor, who the kid said, oh, for crying out, go talk to the pastor. Well, the story goes, the priest, unless he was John of the Cross, would certainly side with the view of their children. You're crazy. This is dangerous fundamentalism. This is ultimate naivete. But being a trained pastoral minister, he would probably attempt to dissuade them and bring them to their senses through logic. And so then it goes on, and it says his first comment is that you shouldn't do this. You're needed here, your children, your grandchildren, the church, the community. We need you. There's so much more you can do. But John and Martha have already thought about this objection and respond, we appreciate your saying that, and it's nice to be wanted, but realistically, we're not needed. What we've had to give, we've already given through the last 50 years. We did the work. We provided for our kids. We love them deeply. But in going to Pakistan and ending our lives this way, we want to give our kids and grandkids something else, something deeper. Well, there are 2 more scenarios, 2 more answers that the pastor has to try to dissuade them. They've thought about good responses to both his answers. One was about their safety and what are you going to do, and what if you get sick and you have to go to a hospital? And they said, that's the whole thing. If we had a return ticket and a credit card in case things got bad, that ruins the whole thing. And then he has another, this is naivete, you don't know anything about it. And they said, well, no, we don't know much about Pakistan or the Muslim faith, but we've read a few books, but we really just plan to go out of love and so forth. And then the author of the book, who's Rolheiser, who's written the story, says, here's a big question. At the end of it all, let's see. They say, finally, in trying to discern what we might do in our final years so as to give our deaths away more deliberately. And that's a concept that Rolheiser has introduced here. We're giving our life away during the middle stages of life. We've given it to the community, to our children, to our church, to our work. Okay, we've given our life away. How do we give our death away as a final? And he says, let's assume that these folks did this ridiculous thing. And then they died over there. And it's 10 years later. What do you think their family is saying about them? Are they saying, boy, our grandparents, our kids, or our parents, they were ridiculous. I mean, they did the stupidest thing you ever saw. Or would they say, oh my, let me tell you about this incredible faith journey that our grandparents took and the things that they did. And they have left such a gift for us in terms of, and I think, and Rolheiser thinks that the things they'd be saying about these folks is the latter of those two scenarios, they were really ridiculous and stupid. The gift that they gave to their family was this incredible example of faith.
And having that was a little bit of our journey to the Springs.
I was going to say, how did that impact you, both of you?
Yeah. But
thinking of giving your death away.
Yeah. When we were in our 70s. And
when we made the decision to leave Chicago, we'd been there. When we went, I told Bill that I thought we'd be there 5 or 6 years. I was 55, and we thought we had vision for life after 60. And we wound up being there 19 years. And I'd always wanted to get back to Cincinnati. So we made the announcement. We were coming back next summer to Cincinnati. And this was 2009. And I said, it doesn't make much sense financially to buy another house at this stage of life for who knows how long. I think the wise thing for us to do is find a nice apartment, live in an apartment. And then through a series of totally unforeseen, unanticipated nudges from God and unusual, I'd love to tell the story, but that would take up more time than the whole podcast. Here we are on a 150-acre retreat center. And it's a most wonderful thing that's happened in all our lives. Well, you have to be careful when you say the most wonderful. Because lots of other things.
I think what we could say is it's one of the most surprising things, because we haven't seen many examples of this kind of adventure. I mean, Abraham and Sarah were an example of it. And our son actually said to us, Mom and Dad, do you know what you're doing? And Dick said,
I said to him, son, I'm not at all offended by your asking, because frankly, the only answer I can give you is, no, I'm not sure I am. I do. But God seems to be saying, take the next step. And I've kidded from time to time in more recent years. I said, I think what God must have done, because I'm basically a pretty stewardship-oriented guy and an engineer, numbers and what have you. And I said, I think God turned off my rational part of my brain. Because taking over this failing Christian retreat center that hardly anybody came to, and it was multiple 6 figures in debt, and the facilities were in bad shape and everything else. I mean, it was the stupidest financial thing I could ever have done. And it did it. I got a mortgage on this rundown house that we were going to have to live in. And I hadn't had a mortgage for 25 years or so. Yeah. And,
Yeah, and it was a
but it's, yeah,
it was a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
That's the
we didn't have a big,
yes. I mean, that was, and in that regard, it still is a bit of a one-way ticket.
we said we could stay as long as we,
Yeah, and I didn't know what I was going to do.
That's what I was going to say. I want to get
Oh.
into that season a little bit because it was like in some ways. And then, Lindsay, I know we have some questions of like, what's unique now, even in your own, but as we talk about that stage of, mid 70s, and you're starting over in some ways and starting fresh and starting new. And how long have you been at the Springs now?
16 years.
16 years. And in those 16 years, and we won't go down that rabbit trail, that's a whole nother podcast of how you've mentored and developed people there again, but that's a pattern. And I think, for people to think that are coming into second half of life, what are the patterns that I'm seeing? What are the ways that God continues to use the same gifts and talents
Yes.
in me rather than laying them aside? But, as you think, then here you are. And if you both don't mind sharing what your ages are at this point, I think that gives some perspective. Dick, how old are you as of today?
88 as of today.
88 and
89 in October.
And I made
85. The unique challenges of spiritual life. And Lindsay, why don't you kind of bring us into this part of the conversation? What does that look like now?
Right. As you've kind of looked at, you talked about that idea of what does it mean to give your death away? And as you've been at the Springs and have taken a unique path to vocation and work and how that looks at a time when most people are backing away from that and you are leaning more in. But even in that, I know that's looked different for you. But what has that looked like? What have you learned, have you noticed about life with God in this particular stage that feels different than earlier decades? What would you say about that?
It's much less about outward. It is not about producing. It's about being present, and it's about living with gratitude, and it's about living with an integrity. I'm not proving myself to someone. Now I have responsibility for something that I bring, but the work is I'm continuing to get out of the way. And so even the creating of the space of the Springs, Dick is more than I have, but has worked on the outside with other people. But there are a lot of people who wouldn't know he's done that. And yet there's a great satisfaction in partnering with God on the behalf of others in that way. And in the work I'm doing in teaching and facilitation is not doing it alone. And it is saying the expertise is less in me and it's more in them. And so the way in which I listen, the way in which I conduct a session is the expertise is in them. And then enjoying that. So that keeps I keep practicing getting out of the way. And having named in a year ago new executive directors, that provides a whole nother level of being able to stay at the Springs, having been a part of founding it with Skip and Linda Holmes, of saying, this is not ours to move forward. And how do we quietly and presently really encourage and bless and support the new leadership? That's actually being a good grandparent. A good grandparent is not reparenting your kids as they parent. It's really cheering them on and being the kind of embodiment that gives encouragement to your life.
Yeah. I think my answer to your question, I would reiterate something Sibyl said in terms of the value of and importance of gratitude. I think it's true at all stages of life, but particularly now. And gratitude in the face of the inevitable diminishments. of life. I mean, age does bring about diminishments. There's no two ways about that. And again, Parker Palmer, in his book that was published on his 80th birthday, On the Brink of Everything, written by an 80-year-old. Okay, when you're 80, when you're 88, I'm on the brink. There's no two ways about that. And I've been incredibly fortunate, blessed by good health and a body that still can do a whole lot of things that most people can't do when they're 88. But I can't do what I could do when I was 58 either, and certainly not 28. So an acceptance of that and a gratefulness, not just acceptance, but a grateful acceptance for these bonus years and whatever we are able to accomplish, which is bonus accomplishments or whatever. When I say accomplishments, I mean whatever contributions,
Yes.
So, yeah, and I find myself saying dozens of times a day, "Thank you, Lord." Just when I bump into this or I bump into that, or this happens or that happens, or I remember where it was that I put that tool down.
Yeah.
I say, "Thank you, Lord."
So the outer body is wasting away, and the culture is focused on how I look and on the outer body. And it isn't paying attention to the inner body. My experience is, how can I live with the limitations of the outer body as well as I can, not letting that go aside, but as well as I can. But then the inner expansion of love, And so then one day I will walk through the birth canal, or could be carried through the birth canal of the earth and on the other side and take a breath, and this body will not be necessary. But the culture is so bent on telling me, unless I have this body, I have nothing.
I'm so proud of Sibyl. She does have a situation currently with her back and hip that is painful and causes her to walk with a limp, and she's using a cane now. And she's absolutely unabashed by the need to use a cane. And I've been so proud of her. She says, "Hey, this is my best friend. This is going to keep me from falling and stuff, and this isn't a big deal."
What?
Acceptance again. Yes. Grateful acceptance.
Yes. And that in itself, to me, I mean, hearing you talk and knowing you both fairly well, it is a spiritual practice in its own right to come to those places of, and I think that's something, Lindsay and I have been talking about a lot personally and professionally, is every stage of life has the practice of being present with God looks different, and it's needed differently from, I need to write in my journal and read my Bible and do all the things there is a season where those things are very necessary. And Sibyl, you and I've talked to you enough to know there was a season of deep biblical study and learning and courses and things that you did. And those are necessary and needed.
Yes.
And then there's this season that you're in now that the practice is very different.
Practice is practice of what you've studied and read and come to know and understand.
I'll show you it. Yeah, I have my Bible that I taught Old and New Testament, and the underlinings and the notes. And the Bible I have today, I mean, I use the phone and I use a Bible, has no underlinings in it, which was just one of the things that was different. But it's the embodiment.
It's the letting go. I mean, I hear a letting go. In there. Yeah.
So it's what's been in me all of my life that is having a chance to, I hope, have a freer movement out of me. I didn't go buy this at the store. Just like as I say to a parent, you don't go buy puberty for your kids. It's all God's given, everything in it. And if you grow and develop in proper ways and have enough, it unfolds. Well, this stage is an unfolding stage. And in our culture, it has not been valued. We are an adolescent culture that is trying to find our identity. And we do not have the respect or even understanding of what it looks like to become a true elder. Many cultures had true elders, wise ones in their communities that didn't meddle with the work of the day, but were present with a question, a word, a look of encouragement.
Speaking of, and I don't want to miss this opportunity, and then Lindsay will start to wrap. We could talk to you guys for hours. Before we hit record, Lindsay was polite enough to say, "How long do you have?" And Dick said, "Well, not past 10 o'clock tonight." We're not going to go that long, but there's so much wisdom. But Dick, there was something you did, and as Sibyl was talking about wisdom, questions to be passed down, things to be shared. There was a point, I think you were 80, so long past that now,
Yep.
where you wrote some things down for your family.
Yes.
So kind as to share some of that or a few of that with our listeners.
Yeah. I asked myself on my 80th birthday, we were coming together as a total family over the weekend, and I thought, what would I most like to say to the grandkids, the great-grandkids, and then our kids? And so it's just a list. I think there are 18 or 19. I entitled it Truths and Practices that have been significant to me, or that I feel I've learned from, and as a truth and practices from a very grateful husband, father, opa, and great opa. And so it's everything, and it's not a book at all or anything. It was very brief comments, but I did present it to them verbally, and we talked about it then, and it sounded a bit, but everything from a huge part of success is just doing what you say you'll do. I mean, it just, so many folks promise that they'll do this or that and just never get around to doing it, that for those of us who regularly do what we say we're going to do, which in a way ought to only earn you a C, a C. If you did what you said, fine, you ought to do that. But it gets you an A+ because a whole bunch of other people don't do what they do. So you look really good. So things like that, trust in the Lord and do good. Yeah, I said, if I had to boil all the teachings and all the other kinds of stuff, theological this and theological that's down to, said you only have one sentence to say, what would it be? I'd say, Psalm 37, trust in the Lord and do good. And by good, Jesus defined what good was, and it's love, and being so, a whole bunch of things like that. We grow and learn most from the hard times. Fear not. Hey, fear. Jesus' life began with a whole series of fear nots. The angels to Joseph and to Mary and to the shepherds and throughout his teaching, it was a fear not. God, and so, God says he'll provide for our needs. He'll be with us during the hard times, and death has lost its sting. So what's to fear? Fear not. Don't go. So I did a whole bunch of things like that.
Yeah. Well,
Which I think is, I would encourage anyone, particularly those of us or those in the fourth quarter, to think about what are the things that you want to pass on. There is an accumulative effect of little things over an extended period of time. apply it to just about anything. Certainly applies financially, a little bit of savings, a little bit of debt. I mean, it's accumulation can be positive or negative. A little bit of exercise or a little bit of goodness and kindness, and there's a cumulative effect. And oh my goodness.
Thank you, Dick, for sharing some of those. And we might twist his arm a little bit to get all of those and maybe be able to include them in our show notes, Lindsay. I'll let you
can. I see you delighted.
because I would love to. I know many listeners would love to just have a written copy to ponder and pray over of, and an example even of how would I share, how would I give a word of wisdom, in this season, and all of that. So thank you, Dick, for sharing from your heart and that with something very special to you for your family that we get to hear as well. My day has been made, if you're listening in, because Dick has read to me on this podcast. Was one of my favorite things when I come to the Springs is to sit around the table and have Dick read you a story. So I've been read to, and I've heard some of those things as well. And your life is rich and is still very rich. And I think that's one of the things that I always take away after spending time with you is that God, I've heard you both say bonus time, but that God is just not finished with us until he's finished with us.
Yes.
And, that, and to see you all live that out and to practice still in the ways that God is calling you to, both in your work and in your lives. Yeah. Lindsay, thoughts, ways that you want to wrap as we come around this topic?
Well, I'm just so grateful for you both sharing parts of your story with us today. It is so encouraging and inspiring to see the way that the both of you continue to lean in and do the deeper work, that you're not checked out. You haven't said, I'm done, and pass it on to other people, but you are still engaged in the work yourself. And I learned so much from the both of you. And I hope that those listening can take that encouragement to just notice, what is God's invitation in this season? God is never done with us. There is always more that God has. And so, and also just, Dick, as you're sharing your wisdom that you passed on to your grandchildren, that we could receive that ourselves and also notice, as you said, Teresa, what is that wisdom that we want to pass on to others? So I'm just so grateful for both of you for being on with us today.
And I would say, Sibyl, I just love hearing from you, and I'd love to just give you a chance for some last words as we wrap up even this conversation about this season of life. And what would you invite someone who's listening in that is sitting maybe very similarly? There's in their 80s, maybe not exactly where they would want to be. And they're hearing a little bit of a challenge right now. What would be words for someone in that season? Or maybe you're caretaking your parent.
Yes.
You might be in your mid-60s and you're
Yes.
taking care of someone. What wisdom, what words of encouragement might you give?
Yeah. Well, I think the whole of life is integration. And so with integration means that I come to places in my life where there is no one that I have left in my life unforgiven. The integrity, the word integral, which is fullness, is shalem, Shellem. And for me to have peace, shalom, I need to have shalem. In this season of my life, I'm realizing where I am. I want to have what Dallas Willard said, spontaneous love for my enemies. And sometimes that enemy is myself. Sometimes it's a family member. Sometimes it's a national, can be any number of things. But I need to come to peace, and that means I have inner work to do, to grieve, to then, after slowly grieving, to forgive, and then to bless. And I will leave this world, if I have done that, a much better place.
Beautiful friend. Thank you.
You are so welcome.
Thanks, Sybil.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Sybil, for being with us.
you're welcome.
And such a beautiful way to close this series, Teresa, as we've just had conversations with people in different seasons. And so thank you for bringing your reflections on being in your 80s and what is still ahead for you. It's such a beautiful thing to witness and to see in your life. So thank you so much.
Community.
Yes, friends, that kind of wraps up this series. Continue listening in. We will be starting a new series and a new topic here on the Real Life Practice podcast. And so thank you. Couldn't have thought of a better way to bring this series to a close. I'm like Lindsay, like just such wisdom and such beauty in this space. So thank you both of Dick and Sybil, dear friends, for bringing those words. And I know that they will bless those that are listening in. Okay.
Yes. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back with a new season in a couple of weeks. So thanks for listening. Check the show notes for some resources and next steps, and we'll be with you next time.